Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker needs very little introduction at all. She's an actress, she's a writer, you'll know her from television, you'll know her from radio, you'll know her from EastEnders, you'll know her from Doctor Who. I give you Tracy Ann Oberman.
It's amazing to see so many people here today. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Tracy Ann Oberman. I am an actress and a writer. I am not a politician. I am not an activist. It is not my job to be standing here today. I don't really want to be standing here today. And yet I feel I have no choice. It seems incredible to me that in 2019, in the centre of London, I'm talking at a rally here in Parliament Square, talking about anti-Semitism, anti-Jewish racism, and how we as a community feel the need to come together with our friends and allies to feel less alone, less scared, less isolated, heard. We're all here today because we need to be seen, and we need to know that we're not alone. We stand by other minorities, for other minorities. The Jewish way has always been to stand against injustice, to give to charity, to never look the other way. Now we ask for the same privilege. This is my story. In the last 4 years, I've seen a growing rise in anti-Jewish hatred, recently culminating with people being attacked on public transport, rabbis beaten up in the streets, online, on social media, and in the real world. When I first became aware of it, I looked to the political class to sort it out. I saw them as the grown-ups, to march in and deal with it. But no grown-ups marched in. I started to see anti-Semitic, almost Nazi-esque tropes in the most surprising of places. Places where I would normally feel at home. At Glastonbury, 3 years ago, there was a poster talking about the evils of the Rothschilds and how all global ills stemmed from their control. No one took it down. Murals approved by politicians who should know better. Holocaust denial being advocated. I personally have been told that the Holocaust is exaggerated, that the numbers don't add up. If your family died in the Holocaust, why are you still here? Someone posted to me last week. Pictures of blood-sucking aliens grafted onto Star of Davids being reposted again and again by activists trying to reach as many people online as they can. Swastikas daubed onto Jewish artifacts put out with political messages. Jews and money, Jews and cabals, Jews controlling things behind the scenes. Powerful, rich Jews controlling, trying to manipulate global concerns. I was seeing this popping up on my screen regularly. I was accused of it myself. When I was 4 years old, my parents took me on a day trip to the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem, to Yad Vashem. I was far too young to take in or to understand what I was seeing, but I saw picture after picture of pits full of bodies, a pile of children's shoes, of teeth and hair. I realized that this was the end game of unchecked prejudice. This was the end game of institutionalized anti-Semitism, of racism, and the finale of when good people close their eyes and do nothing. In my student days, I marched against Clause 28. I stood with Viraj Mendes. I marched against South African apartheid. I fought against misogyny. I have always stood against my friends, against injustice and persecution. This is what I was taught. This is what I believe we as Jews have been taught. And I think that what has been the hardest thing to realize in the UK in 2019 is that normally when a minority comes under attack, you listen to them, you hear them, you protect them. What has shocked me is that we haven't been listened to. I've been told by countless strangers, by friends, old friends and colleagues, that what I have experienced isn't true, that I have an ulterior motive for speaking out on anti-Semitism, that basically Jews are not to be trusted. Last night at 10 p.m, before anyone knew what was going to be said. What is my training? Can you hear me? Are we back on? Yes, we're back on. Last night at 10 p.m, before anybody knew what was going to be said at this rally, a member of the Labour Party sent me this. A memo was sent out calling on fellow comrades and activists to fight against the smears that were going to be talked about today by ringing up their local radio stations. In fact, I'm going to read you just a little bit of it because I want you to hear it. I was so shocked. This is institutionalized attack. They were told to ring councillors' radio stations to say that what we were doing here today was a smear and an attack. That it didn't matter how small the radio station was, it still had thousands of listeners. That was before anyone knew what myself or Robbie or Tom was going to, or Fayaz were going to talk about today. I started to speak out on social media because I could see that these were platforms where people were using them as battlegrounds to radicalize people. The end result is synagogue massacres and murders in mosques. We all have to be on social media platforms to fight. The Jewish community are caught between the pincer grip of the far right and the hard left. Things that used to be mumbled into pints of beers in pubs or behind closed doors of gentlemen clubs are now spoken about and shared freely, without shame. Everyday anti-Semitism, everyday anti-racism has become a thing of my life, and I'm sure for many of you here. In Charlottesville, Louisiana, white supremacists marched with burning torches, shouting, "Blacks will not replace us, immigrants will not replace us, Jews will not replace us." Here in the UK, the left were and continue to post their thousands of images and cartoons about Jews, not seen since Nazi Germany and anti-Jewish propaganda. I myself have been called a Jewish bitch, a Zio shill, a paid Israeli Mossad operative with too many shekels in my bank account, that I speak out because I am a tax evader, that like all Jews, I just want to hide my money. I am a Zio whore and a baby killer. Every day I wake up to a barrage of abuse online because I will not shut up, I will not be intimidated, and I will not go away.
Bravo!
I've noticed that as a Jewish woman, I am attacked far more fervently and with ferocity than that of my male counterparts. The misogyny runs deep in anti-Jewish hatred. Luciana Berger, Margaret Hodge, Rachel Riley, Louise Ellman, Frances Barber, Karen Pollock, Isabel Housecroft, Sarah Gibbs, Tanya Gold, Maureen Littman, Joan Ryan, and even Tracy Ullman, who isn't Jewish herself, have at one time or another been insulted, been called a Zio collaborator. The men who stood, we have many allies, thank you, and you know who you are, but thank you David, Lee, Adam, Ben, Dan, Mark, you and all of you, you know who you are. Like many of us here today, my roots stem back to Russia. My great-grandparents met on a boat from Belarus when they were 15 years old. Their parents saved them money to send them third class to the UK to escape the violence of anti-Jewish pogroms. They were staunch trade unionists. They stood for workers' rights. They helped form the Labour movement in the East End. When the fascist anti-Semite Oswald Mosley brought his black shirt hordes to march through the streets of the East End, my Bubba Annie and her children, Faye, Leslie and Arnold, stood side by side with their fellow Irish, black and English working class neighbours to stop them. My great-grandma Annie called the United Kingdom the Golden Medina. She didn't want to go anywhere else. This was her home. It was a tolerant, moderate, inclusive home where she felt safe. We have many allies, and we are not alone. There are people who didn't have to stand up for us over the last few years, and yet they have. I'd like to say thank you to journalists like Nick Cohen, Suzanne Moore. Alison Pearson told me to tell you today that she receives letters at her publication from thousands of readers every day who say they are prepared to form a Praetorian Guard around the UK Jewish community.
Bravo!
Thank you also to John Le Carre, Joanna Lumley, Trevor Phillips, Simon Callow, those wonderful people who stood and wrote a letter and took the time to put their heads above the parapet to say no, not on my watch. Nearly over. Hang on. Cold fingers. Hang on. Here we go. The actor and writer, co-creator of Goodness Gracious Me and a very good friend, Sanjeev Bhaskar, couldn't be here today. He wanted to be. But he asked me to tell you a quote and offer his solidarity. He said, "To stand against racism, prejudice, anti-Semitism is bigger than politics, bigger than academic debate, bigger than whataboutery. It's about the very soul of our society." As British Jews, we take on many forms: religious, irreligious, identifying, non-identifying, part of a community or completely unaffiliated. But we have a right to be whoever we want to be. This is our home. We don't want to go anywhere. We don't have to go anywhere. We have a right to be here. We have a right to feel heard. We have a right to feel welcome. And we have a right to feel safe. Thank you.
Bravo.